Welcome to Research Renaissance, presented by the Karen Toffler Charitable Trust. Embark on a journey into the forefront of cutting-edge brain science as we feature insightful discussions with a diverse array of guests, from early career researchers pioneering groundbreaking science to influential voices in investment communities, policymaking, and research institutions. Together, we delve into neurological diseases, their causes, treatments, and the quest for cures. Join us in advancing our understanding of the brain and addressing its ailments. Welcome to Research Renaissance. I'm Deborah Westphal, your host and guide through the fascinating future of the brain. Joining me today is Dr. Sylvia Fossati, Associate Professor of Neurosciences and the Associate Director at the Alzheimer Center at Temple University. Sylvia is also a 2021 Toffler Scholar. Today's discussion is focused on vascular dysfunction in the brain and its influence on Alzheimer's and other related brain diseases and conditions. So let's dive in. Welcome, Sylvia. I'm so excited to have you today.
Hi, Deborah. Thank you for inviting me. And it's really nice to be here with you and doing this.
I love your passion for what you do. And it's so interesting to talk to you and what you're doing and the research that you're doing. And I'm super excited to hear more about your lab and some of the people working in it. So, but let's just start, first of all, with tell me a little bit about yourself and your academic journey, and how did you get to Temple?
Yes, it's been a long journey, all the way from Italy. As you know, I'm from Tuscany, close to Florence in Italy. So I did my, school there, and then I also did my PhD there in Florence. And that's where I really started to study the brain and getting more and more fascinated about it. And I knew I wanted to keep doing it. And to do it really well, they said, you have to do an experience in the US. There's more possibility. There's more money for research as well, So I started looking right after my PhD, and I found the possibility to come to NYU in New York for a postdoctoral fellowship. And of course, who doesn't want to go to New York? So I was very excited, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go to New York, do this for a couple of years, and then come back to Italy and do my career in Italy. Eventually, after I moved to New York, I really liked it there. I liked what I was doing in my lab. I started really studying Alzheimer's, and I started studying the themes that keep coming into my research today. And so I didn't want to leave. I was, very, very happy with my life there. And eventually, after a 5-year postdoc, I was offered a position in a different department, Department of Neurology and Psychiatry, still at NYU, where I was given an assistant professor position there. So I stayed there for a few more years, and now almost 5 years ago, I was offered this position as associate professor and associate director of the Alzheimer Center here at Temple, which was a great opportunity for me to start something new, to kind of increase the presence of Alzheimer's research here at Temple in Philadelphia and really expand my lab. So I took this opportunity. I came to Philadelphia, I came to Temple, and went very well so far.
And the rest is history, right? So you said you became really fascinated with the brain. And then when you got to New York, you started studying Alzheimer's. And what was the fascination of the brain?
Yeah, so I've always been very curious in general. So I've always been fascinated with learning how things work at the biological level inside the body. And my mom tells me, I don't even remember that I was saying I wanted to be a researcher since I was a kid. But I didn't really know when I was younger what I wanted to study. So I was trying, during my university career, different things. And when I ended up into this lab where I was doing my PhD and we were studying cerebral ischemia, stroke, possible therapies, because it was a pharmacology department, I really started understanding like how complex the brain is and how many things are involved in brain function, but also dysfunction mostly, which is what we really study, like when things go wrong. And my curiosity was really like triggered there. Okay, how can we make this better? How can we stop this death of brain cells? And brain cells are so many different types and they do very different things from each other: neuronal cells, glial cells, vascular cells. So I wanted to see how these cells collaborate and make the brain work, and what goes wrong when it doesn't work. And that's mostly what I was fascinated with, and therefore my fascination with Alzheimer's disease, when really the brain goes wrong with aging and you can't remember things anymore. And there are so many things at the same time that go wrong.
Yeah.
So,
is there Alzheimer's and dementia in your family that was an influence too, or is it just the fascination?
there was some dementia in my family, not really Alzheimer's, but there were a couple of people. I remember my great grandmother, actually, she was alive when I was a kid and she had dementia in late life in her 90s. But my will to do research in Alzheimer's is more because I know that there is a lot to be done in this field. It's very important. Everybody, all of us are gonna age. And as we cure different diseases like cardiovascular disorders, cancer, and other diseases, more and more people are gonna arrive to that age in the 80s, in the 90s. And unfortunately, we don't really have a good cure for Alzheimer's disease yet. So I think I always wanted to do something that was relevant and that could help people. And I think this is one of the most relevant fields that we could work on right now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about your lab? And, if you get on the website, it talks about investigating, the brain diseases, Alzheimer's, and this cerebral amyloid angiopathy. And I think I'm saying that correctly. Can you explain what this is and why studying this is so important?
Yes, of course. So everybody knows, right, that Alzheimer's, you lose your memory, you lose your neurons, and there is pathology in the brain. And this pathology for many, many years has been thought to be mainly two things. One is amyloid that deposits outside the brain cells in the brain parenchyma. And the other one is tau, phosphorylated tau, that deposits inside the neurons and forms these tangles that induce neuronal loss. But there is another form of pathology that is very important in Alzheimer's disease that is also related to amyloid deposition, but not just in the parenchyma of the brain, but around the vessels in the brain. So, of course, brain vessels, especially arteries in this case, are what brings the blood to the brain, the nutrients to the brain. And there is this amyloid deposition around arteries and capillaries as well in the brain in Alzheimer's people, but also in people in their 80s and 90s that don't have Alzheimer's. We can have this pathology and it will induce a type of dementia that is not Alzheimer's. So all this amyloid around the vessels creates a lot of problems in the vascular system in the brain. One is that hypoperfusion, so reduced amount of oxygen, glucose, and nutrients to the brain. And of course, when you have lower nutrients, lower oxygen, your brain cells will start to die. And the other thing is that there is a barrier between the brain and the blood. It's called the blood-brain barrier, of course. And this barrier is extremely important, not only for the brain to maintain its independence from the rest of the body, from an immunological standpoint. So the brain has to be a little more protected compared to other organs from the immune system, because we want it to kind of keep functioning even in situations in which we may have an immune reaction, right? So there is this blood-brain barrier that somehow protects the brain. And the blood-brain barrier becomes leaky when we have cerebral amyloid angiopathy. So there is a more stuff that comes into the brain from the blood, including immune cells, including factors that we don't want to be in the brain. So this creates inflammation in the brain. And at the same time, there are problems in clearance of these amyloid and other garbage products from the brain. So when there is a lot of amyloid around the vessels don't work as well to push out this garbage from the brain. So there are a lot of problems that are due to this vascular deposition of amyloid that will affect all the other cells in the brain. And then what my lab really focuses on is to understand what goes wrong in the vessels, how we can find targets for therapy to block these events, to make the vessels more healthy, to increase cerebral blood flow, to improve clearance, and therefore this will help reduce inflammation, reduce neuronal loss, and improve memory at the end.
So this study or this research around the blood-brain barrier, is this something new, or has this been all the time? Like, is it decades of research, or are we just starting to find out about the importance of this?
It's very interesting, actually, because there were very few people that were interested in these decades ago, maybe a couple of decades ago. But it was like such a niche thing. It was known, but not so many people cared in the Alzheimer's field. So now what's happening is that we are learning more, and we are learning more and more how much this is important. So the field is in this particular interest is exploding, and I'm realizing, even in the Alzheimer's Association International Conference that we will have in July in Philadelphia, that we will have a lot of sessions on vascular dysfunction. So it's something that people knew that was there, but really in the last few years, I would say maybe like 5 years, has become known how important it is. Another important thing is that the new therapies that are being FDA approved for Alzheimer's, such as the anti-amyloid antibodies, cause side effects. One of these side effects is called ARIA, which is amyloid-related imaging abnormalities. And those abnormalities are related to problems with the blood-brain barrier, where amyloid is dragged to the vessels, increases this cerebral amyloid angiopathy, and increases leakage of the blood-brain barrier. So we have edema in the brain, swelling in the brain, fluids coming in. And in some cases, we have hemorrhages in these people that are taking these anti-amyloid antibodies. So in some cases, it's not very symptomatic. In other cases, it's symptomatic and it resolves itself. And in a few cases, there have been deaths also due to that. So now there is a lot of focus on the vasculature also because of this. So what we study, really people are paying attention.
Yeah, it's an unintended consequence of these therapies that were focused in the brain on amyloid without the consideration of kind of that blood transfer. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, without understanding really what it does to the brain vessels. So when you're trying to get the amyloid out of the brain, it will have to go through the vascular wall to go to the blood, right? And so that passage is really not yet clear. How does that happen? And what does it cause to the vessels? And in some people that have higher risk factors, such as ApoE4 genotype, that is much more pronounced, and you have more people that have this problem. Yeah.
So if you looked at a brain with these vascular problems, and then you looked at a healthy brain, is there visual differences in that blood-brain barrier that we can see either by, our eyes or under a microscope?
Yes, there are various different ways to see the differences. A lot of these differences can be seen by MRI. So if you do imaging in a person, MRI, magnetic resonance imaging in a person who's alive and has these vascular issues such as cerebral amyloid angiopathy, you can see some specific markers, and they are still being studied and understood more and more what these markers could be. But you could be able to see microhemorrhages, you would be able to see enlarged perivascular spaces and edema, so white matter abnormalities, they call it, which is very related to cerebrovascular dysfunction. So this is one way to see it. Of course, you can also see it in neuropathology. So when you have a post-mortem brain of a person that has it, you can see that they have these problems with the blood-brain barrier, these hemorrhages, and these other things. But there are really many different types of, if you talk about Alzheimer's disease, there are many different types of diseases. So there are people that may have a lot of vascular compromise and people that have almost none. And this is, we think, especially in my lab, we think this is also related to the cardiovascular risk factors that you might have previously in your life. So, for example, if you have midlife hypertension, you have higher risk to develop Alzheimer's disease. And we think that this is due to the effect of hypertension on the blood vessels in the brain that can precipitate and basically create bases to develop Alzheimer's faster. And other cardiovascular risk factors that we are studying.
Yeah, I'm curious because when you study, do you study inside the brain and then how that blood flows outside and then comes back in? Or do you study more primary outside and how it goes into the brain and comes back out, and maybe creating this weakness, if you would, of this blood-brain barrier? Because, if we're doing things in our lives with other parts, what we eat or not exercising or not taking care of our heart, is that what is affecting the brain versus the brain affecting,
Yes.
the opposite? I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but it's fascinating.
That is a great question, actually. Yes. And it's something that we have started looking into in our lab, because a lot of people in the Alzheimer's field in particular are looking at how vascular risk factors that come from the body affect the brain. And we are looking at that too. So, if you have blood flow that is not correctly coming into the brain, you have less blood flow, that will affect the brain. But we're also looking at the opposite. So when you have these issues in the brain, such as amyloid pathology around the vessels, does it affect the other organs? And in particular, we're looking also at the heart. So when you have Alzheimer's in your brain, and we're looking at animal models, we're doing cell studies, and we're doing some human studies. When you have Alzheimer's, how is your heart? Do you have issues with your heart as well that are due to the pathology that you have in your brain and not to other things? So we are right now looking at both ways, and I have people studying either one in my lab.
Yeah, I have a friend that is actually I'm not sure exactly what his formal title of his role, but he works with the Alzheimer's Association, and he goes when people, he's kind of the advocate for people and gives them information on, okay, this is what to expect. But he says it's very simple. What's good for the heart is good for the brain. And I kind of always think about that, because there's some things that we can't do, genetics and that. But the more we're learning about that connection, take care of your heart, take care of your, all of that. Yeah.
Sure. That is true. And the opposite too. What's good for your brain is probably also good for your heart. So
yeah, you just shed light on that, right? That's for sure.
To look at that.
So I imagine your lab has, these focus areas. Maybe you have them written on the wall. Maybe, everybody kind of knows what your priorities are. What are the priorities, are there two or three that are just really, okay, these are the things that we're really focused on? And what are those?
Yes, there are a few. And of course, the bigger the lab becomes, the more we expand in that. But we have a few priorities. One is to really understand the mechanisms of this vascular dysfunction in the brain. And to look into that, we particularly focus on mitochondrial dysfunction mechanisms because the mitochondria are very important, not only as an energy source for the cells, but also as a signaling factor in the cell that signals to the cell to live or die. So we study the mitochondria for energy production, but also for cell death and pro-apoptotic mechanisms. So voluntary cell death, basically, by which the cells kind of kill themselves. So we study those mechanisms because we want to understand what particular targets we can find. And then if we find targets that are really modulated by amyloid in cerebrovascular cells, let's say endothelial cells in the brain, then we can target them. We can find drugs that can revert those changes and then make it better. So the second priority, let's say, is to find these drugs. And we have some drugs that we've been studying for a couple of years that are part of the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors family. There are some that are already FDA approved for other disorders, such as glaucoma, high altitude sickness, and nobody has ever studied them in Alzheimer's. So we are the first lab to really start diving into the function of carbonic anhydrases in Alzheimer's and how the inhibitors of these drugs really can improve memory, inflammation, vascular function, clearance of amyloid and other species, pathological species from the brain.
That's super interesting. High altitude medicine, right? And I'm kind of fascinated by that. So why would you study high altitude medicine for its relationship to possibly treating Alzheimer's?
One interesting thing that they have in common and I think nobody is studying high altitude sickness in relation to Alzheimer's. But what we found is that because high altitude sickness can cause cerebral edema, so swelling of the brain, this is something that can also happen in people that have Alzheimer's, cerebral amyloid angiopathy, and they can have leakage of the blood-brain barrier, so more fluids into the brain, right? So there is this commonality, and these drugs help relieve that part. And that is one thing. The other thing is in relation to pressure in the brain and pH in the brain. So pH regulation is very important for all these disorders, and there is a lot to learn. We haven't learned as much as we would like to, but depending on what part of the cell you're targeting, these enzymes are 16 all over the cell in different organelles. So depending which specifics one you're targeting, you may regulate pH, and that regulates the function of some organelles in the cell. For example, you can regulate mitochondrial membrane potential by regulating pH, and that will help us making the mitochondria stronger and then the cell healthier. And once the cell is healthier, the brain will thrive and survive.
So I know your lab also looks at traumatic brain injury, PTSD, some of these other things that affect the brain. What is the connection there? And is it the same type of connection that you're trying to understand with like high altitude and that damage and that swelling? What is the connection of why study these things too?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important. The connection with traumatic brain injury, for example, is more from a risk factor point of view. So we know that if you have especially repeated traumatic brain injuries, even concussions, so mild traumatic brain injury, that can cause an increased risk of Alzheimer's. And a lot of it may be due to effects on the axons of the neurons in the brain, because there is a shared stress, a movement of these neurons. But we think in particular that there is also something that is related to the vessels, right? So similarly to what happens in Alzheimer's, in traumatic brain injury, the vessels might be injured and there may be blood-brain barrier permeability and some cell death in especially microvessels. So all these events, especially if they are repeated, they will fix themselves if the TBI is mild. But then if it happens again, there is like a sort of a curve that keeps going up. And then eventually you will increase the risk for, especially if you put together amyloid to that, you will increase the risk for blood-brain barrier dysfunction and then development of Alzheimer's. So we look into that, and we look a lot into the biomarkers that can help us identify this risk. So for traumatic brain injury as well as PTSD, we aim to take the blood of subjects with these disorders or neurological diseases and see if we can find molecules in the blood that can help us identify a higher risk for cerebrovascular dysfunction, inflammation, or other problems in the brain. And those people that have those problems, will they develop Alzheimer's earlier? So we are trying to think about that. And we are starting to design studies also with military populations because, of course, they're very high risk for this. So in military populations that are exposed, for example, to TBI many times during their life, do we have these higher risk factors? And at the same time, we are looking at older populations with cardiovascular risk factors to see if the biomarkers in the blood are similar. So we're trying to understand what can tell us that there is a problem.
So Sylvia, can you explain inflammation? Because I think inflammation is not really understood. There's a lot of commercials on inflammation, take this whatever, Advil, whatever it is, or, but can you explain, what is inflammation, and is inflammation the same? Is it a common word that describes many things, or is it just the same across everything in your body?
So inflammation in the brain is very particular. There are very specific cells in the brain that activates these inflammatory pathways that are not the same in many cases as the rest of the body. For example, microglial cells are only in the brain, they're not in the rest of the body. And these cells are needed and they have to be reactive because they are only in the brain, they are born there, right? But if there is something that affects the health of the brain, they have to be there and remove it. So some inflammation is needed to help the brain solve its problems. And then there are astrocytes that are another type of brain-specific inflammatory cells. These cells have very long projections, and some of these projections actually touch the vascular cells, and some of them touch the neurons. So they function as kind of like sending the message between different cells in the brain and telling them, okay, there's something wrong going on here. And they also help microglia in clearing these problems that the brain may have. So we want a little bit of inflammation in the brain when it's needed, like a protective, healthy form of inflammation. Same as in the rest of the body, right? When you have an inflammatory reaction to take away a virus or a bacteria infection. We want that. But then at a certain point, it becomes overreactive. Both microglia and astrocytes become overreactive. And at that point, they start to send toxic messages to the neurons, to the other cells in the brain, and they start to kill the other cells in the brain. Not only, they also die themselves. So at that point, inflammation is bad. So what is tricky, and what we and many others in the field are trying to do, is to find something that can prevent that reactivity, that toxic form, disease-associated inflammation, versus maintaining a little bit of inflammation that is needed to remove the amyloid and to clear substances from the brain. And this is one of the things that the drugs that we use, these carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, are really good at doing, because we saw that, for example, the glial cells, they are still reactive, but they don't get to the neurotoxic stage. They don't have activation of caspases, which are proteases that cut stuff inside the cells and kill them, and they're still able to degrade amyloid, while in the disease in itself, they're not able to do it anymore. Amyloid gets stuck there, and then the whole thing precipitates. So in general, yes, you want inflammation, but not too much.
So if I understand, going back to the importance then of the blood-brain barrier, it's understanding what's coming in to create that overreaction of the inflammation that is killing these very important brain cells that only reside in the brain, that are there as part of our cognitive capability and our thinking and all of that. So that's really, it's not inflammation that you might get if you over exercise and get inflammation in your muscles, or it's a very different kind of inflammation.
Absolutely. And you may have, if the blood-brain barrier doesn't function well, you may have other cells, other inflammatory cells from the blood, monocytes, lymphocytes, macrophages in general, that come into the brain, and they're not supposed to be there in a healthy situation. They come because there's something wrong, right? And then there's kind of a vicious cycle where the more you have, the more inflammation you have, and you have like a storm, an inflammatory storm, and you have like an overproduction of cytokines and all these inflammatory factors that will eventually damage your brain.
So you said you referenced that your priorities and your focus grows as your lab grows. Your lab seems to be growing very rapidly. Is that true? And what's the secret? What are you doing, and how is that happening?
It has in the recent years, yes, which is both a pro and a con. Like, because I'm only one. But no, it was great. As I came to Temple, we got some good funding, and also a lot of interest from students to come into my lab. I think the subject is very fascinating for a lot of people, what we're studying, and it's very broad also. We're not like, there are some labs that focus only on like one specific thing that happens in one specific organelle in the cell. We look at a lot of different cells, a lot of different things happening. So there is opportunity to come, have your ideas, explore them, and kind of create your own path into science, which is happening. I'm really happy to say, because I have some postdocs that are getting awards. I have one that got an award from the NIH, another one from the American Heart Association, and then, hopefully eventually they'll go on and create their own lab. And of course, the Toffler Trust is helping with that also, because creating these scholarship opportunities to support early stage studies that then can go on and have new avenues of research. So.
Yeah, I'm in the introduction, I mentioned you're a Toffler Scholar in 2021, and that was only 3 years ago. And so you were just trying to get your lab started, and so it's you've been very successful. And today you've got 3 Toffler Scholars in your lab. And what does that kind of mean to you and to them to really have some support for that early research, and especially in this new area that is, that you're exploring, and then keeping these people in research so that they can grow a career, because sometimes that's really tough.
It is. And oh my gosh, yeah, it's been great to have that support. because these early stage projects and, students, postdocs, of course, we try to go for big funding, NIH funding, but at the beginning, you're competing with huge labs and projects that are very advanced. So it's really hard to get NIH funding or similar funding. So the Toffler is allowing us to really do the research that brings us to the point in which you can go ask for bigger funding. And the Toffler scholars, not only they get the money to do the research, but they also get something in their CV. They have a scholarship, right? So they have been successful in something, and then when they go on and request more funding, that will help them. So there's a lot of more opportunities that this can create, and that could allow these people to really stay in research, which right now not only is difficult in terms of funding, but also there are a lot of people that they are not really staying for postdocs. So you want to motivate them because, of course, we need to do more research. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I've kind of learned in the last 4 or 5 years since I've been associated with the trust, is that money, there's different colors of money, and it takes it takes the community to fund these things. And there's some funders that would rather have the research a little bit more kind of baked and understood. And then, there's wonderful foundations that give grants and funds and scholarships. But it really is, it's kind of that whole journey, and where you get the money on that journey and the type of money. So, I appreciate that insight. And I know just seeing how you promote these young people is, you're pretty proud of them too.
Yes, oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, they're great, and I have, they're being very successful, and I'm really happy that I can help them start or launch their career depending where they are. So, yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do in my job, actually, to mentor people and to help them get where they want to get. Not always easy, personalities are different and needs are different, but I enjoy the challenge in that.
Yeah, and you're making impacts on their life, and that's amazing. So, the science that you're working is very, very hard, and it's a challenge, and it's you've got a lot of things that you do in your day to day, not just the science, but keeping the funding coming in and mentoring and all of that. What are some of the other challenges just doing what you do that maybe people wouldn't realize that this is challenges to doing research?
Yeah, well, yeah, there are a lot of challenges. One is time. There's never enough time. And I wish I could clone myself or find more help in things that unfortunately I have nobody that could help me with, because we to maintain. Now I'm at that point where I really expanded my lab, but the challenge is to maintain it, right? Of course, you don't want to fire people, you don't want to stop projects, and to maintain it you have to keep getting bigger funding. And that is challenging because to get funding you have to first publish, create preliminary data, write grants that are really good and competitive. Funding money this year has been lowered even more, so it's even more challenging. So that's one of the things: time and how to write effective grants at the same time with mentoring people and writing papers. And it's definitely not an easy job, but but you have to have passion for it. You have to really want to do it. And then, of course, there's always, as big as the lab becomes, there's always personality issues sometimes. So you might find people that don't mesh well with each other, and then you have to navigate that as well, because of course the better people work together, the better the research will be. So sometimes you have to do a little psychology as well, which I don't have a training for, but I would like to. So that is also one of the challenges, and not only with the people that work with you, but also the people that are above you at the university level, you have to understand who you're collaborating with, who you're dealing with, who your boss are, who the boss of your boss is. As in every other job, right? People are sometimes a challenge. But I love collaboration. So I like to really collaborate with different people also outside my field and try so now we have collaborations with people that, for example, work in the microbiome, and we want to understand more the effects of some bacterial amyloid on Alzheimer's. I have collaborations with pharmacologists, people that make drugs that then we can use in the disease, and then many others that really help us, enhance the research that we do.
Yeah. So what is the trend there in your perspective around this current shift to more interdisciplinary approaches? It seems like you almost have to, have your expertise, but you do have to have this broad network into these other expertise. Do you think why is that trend happening? And what are your thoughts as to, will this produce new breakthroughs possibly?
Yes, I think this is essential to really expand the impact of our research. Of course, if everybody stays in their own little niche, we'll do little steps, but we don't do big breakthroughs. But if we start working together, you get another different point of view from people that are completely different from you, and you learn more, and then you can do more. You can tackle problems from a bigger perspective. And I mean, even what we study, right, Alzheimer's, we're now understanding that it's so complex and there are many other problems and diseases involved in the development of Alzheimer's. So it's great to work with people that work in cardiology, for example, or that know more about inflammation, or they know more about, and even when we're starting to look at big data, we do RNA sequencing now, which is pretty standard in biology labs, but then we need people that can analyze those data. We can do bioinformatics, that can do more like artificial intelligence, statistics, and all those things. So even like when you send out a grant, I think the more interdisciplinary your team is, the better the result. And people really recognize how important it is.
Yeah. So you mentioned back in some of the challenges that some of the funding's being lowered. Is that government money or is that focus? Can you be more specific as to what that is?
Yeah, the government money, especially this year, there was a big boom we had good money for Alzheimer's research in the past few years. And this year for, governmental issues and problems, that was a big cut, at least so far. So it's going to be really hard, and it's been almost several months now, almost a year. It's going to be harder for students to get their fellowships approved, for postdocs to get K99 hours, then to get faculty positions, and for us to maintain big labs, because maybe before we had like a 20-25% chance to get a grant. Now we have a 12 to 15% chance. So it's getting harder.
That's really tough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What technology, you mentioned some of the bioinformatics and the big data. What's your perspective on how artificial intelligence or machine learning or, some of these new kind of algorithms, how will this help or not help what you do?
I think it will do great things for science in general, because we are already able to look at these huge data sets and understand, for example, in regard to risk, like what risk factors are really like for the development of a certain disease, or what do people have in common, genetic problems, epigenetic problems. So there is more and more being done with artificial intelligence and machine learning that gives us a lot of information. And I think the problem with it is that we get too much information and we get all these like incredible numbers of genes or incredible numbers of things, targets. And that, so we will still need researchers that go into a little more selective target analysis. Because when you look at these big data projects, they are beautiful, and you can see, brain atlas, or like what every cell in the brain can do specifically, how they differ from each other, and all that. But at the same time, it doesn't give you like one specific target to create a drug for that target, right? So it just tells you very broad messages. So then we will still need to have people that are able to also looking at that data. So based on maybe what your results in the lab are and what you can find in the big data analysis. Okay, what are the things that are really worth studying and what are the things that are really worth targeting? And yes, so there's going to be for sure help, but I think we'll need both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. The AI is not sophisticated enough and may never be sophisticated enough to replace the human. The therapeutics, going back to the therapeutics, your lab looks at kind of existing drugs. Maybe the drugs were focused on something different, but you're looking at how those drugs may help, with some of the new information that you have. Do you see what when you kind of look into the future, are there new kinds of therapeutics that, or even diagnostics, your understanding of the blood-brain barrier, will this lead to blood tests for Alzheimer's? I mean, what do you see in the future for therapeutics and diagnostics?
Yes, we'll have blood tests for Alzheimer's, and that's already very close. It's happening. What we have so far in terms of blood tests are things that are telling us, okay, you really have a higher risk to get Alzheimer's. You have a certain amount of amyloid in your blood. You have a certain amount of phosphorylated tau. So we can pick up those people early enough that we can start testing them for therapeutics that are coming out from a lot of research studies. What we are hoping to do with our studies is to refine these biomarkers. Right now, we have a few biomarkers, some related to Alzheimer's like pathology, so amyloid and tau, some related to neuronal dysfunction, such as NFL, neurofilament light, some related to inflammation in the brain, such as GFAP, which is an astrocyte marker. We don't really have good vascular biomarkers so far. So we are looking into that specific field because we know that vascular is coming as one of the main features of Alzheimer's disease. So far we have amyloid tau neurodegeneration. And we are talking about adding the vascular dysfunction to create a really good diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. But we need biomarkers to define what vascular dysfunction is in the brain and then test the therapies that we have that we're testing so far in the lab in cell models, animal models. We have to bring them to the right people, right? Not everybody has the same pathology in their brain. So we have to kind of create like a precision medicine approach. So with the right biomarkers, we will be able to define what type of pathology that person has in the brain. If they have more inflammation, more amyloidosis, more vascular dysfunction, more tauopathy. And based on that, we will be able to create either a multi-therapy, creating a therapy for multiple targets, or just one therapy, but that is more specific for that person. So eventually, hopefully we get there. But there's like a lot of like good progress in the field.
So I'm very curious your thoughts. We hear that Alzheimer's and dementia is a age-related disease. Is it an age-related disease, or is it our behavior as we age that may be affecting our brain? We started this kind of discussion around, do you look inside or outside first to know? I'm just curious from your perspective, and it may be just my my perspective of where I'm at as far as my age goes, is it a foregone conclusion that it has to be an age-related disease, or is it a lifestyle throughout our life that causes the disease?
Yeah, it is. It's actually both. So age is the main risk factor, obviously, for Alzheimer's disease. As you age, you have much higher risk than, that's why most 95% of cases happen after 65 years of age. So it is an age-related disease. But there are people in some niches, places in the world, for example, in Sardinia, because I'm Italian and I'm mentioning that, but also in Japan or other places, that get to very old ages and they almost never get Alzheimer's disease. So we know that there are things that we could do in theory to protect our brain. And we don't exactly know if those people are protected also genetically or it's all lifestyle, but their lifestyle for certain things helps. One of the things is the diet, that they have very specific diets rich in antioxidants, rich in several types of foods that may improve brain health. Other things could be physical exercise as well. So people that work until late in life, and especially with jobs that are related to physical movement, they are somehow protected. And then people that exercise their brain until late in life. If you maintain a social life, if you maintain an intellectual activity until late in life, and you don't become like just sitting in front of the TV all day or kind of like not doing anything, that definitely we know that helps a lot. So we are not sure yet if doing all the right thing will prevent the disease, but in part, we can try, and it lowers the risk for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's probably just my bias and where I'm at in life, and the birthdays seem to just fly by anymore. So it's just a very curious thing. So I know recently, within the last year or so, that you became a U.S. citizen, and you went through that process, and it was a long process. And so congratulations for that. What does that mean to you, and what does that mean to your research? Is there any effect on your research?
So in terms of what it means for me, of course, like I'm very happy. It took a long time. And this something should be said for all researchers, because people come to this country to do research from all over the world, right? And it takes forever and it's a huge effort, and you start paying taxes, in my case after 2 years, because there is a treaty with Italy, but in many cases immediately you pay taxes, but then you are not recognized as a citizen until 10, 15 years after, right? You come. So maybe that there could be some things done to help in that, but that's another story. But of course, I'm very happy. If you ask my mom, she's like, "You're not going to renounce your Italian one," right? Because, of course, she doesn't want me, but I can have both. So everybody is happy. And in terms of my research, in academia, it doesn't really change much, because luckily, most of the things I could do also with visas, except for some fellowships when you're a student or a postdoc that you can only get if you're a citizen. It does help people that work in industry, because, for example, in industry, if you don't have a green card or you're not a citizen, they don't really, usually like 90% of cases, they don't give you the job. So it would help people that want to transition from academia to industry, for example, to still do research, to get their citizenship or their green card earlier. It's also like a lot of economical effort, because you have to like pay lawyers and all that to do it. But it's like when you get there, you're like, yay!
Because I think in your it took you 14 years. I think that's what I saw. Yeah.
Yes,
That's
we did.
that's quite dedicated. Yeah, dedication.
All the visas, yeah, they do the J1 first, then the H1B, then you have the green card for a few years. You have to have it, and then finally, yes.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. So, what are you most excited about when you look out maybe 5 or 7 years in your area of research? What are you most excited about?
So, well, several things. One thing is like that finally people are recognizing how important the vasculature is in the brain and for Alzheimer's disease. So I don't get, any more those, oh, why is that really important? Like, I don't get those questions anymore, not as much. So I'm really excited about that people recognize how important what we are studying is. And I'm very excited about the therapeutic agents that we are studying because I think we are really close to clinical trials. We are really close to being able to test these in humans. And in a few years from now, hopefully, we will have some results in humans and see if these drugs can be useful not only in Alzheimer's disease, but also at reducing the negative effects I was telling you before that are coming out of the current therapies. So I'm hoping to get there soon. And I'm excited about these brain heart axis studies that we are doing, how we really can analyze what happens in the cardiovascular system depending on brain pathology and vice versa. Some of these things are extremely new. So there's a lot of debate, and we are among the first ones to do it. So it's very exciting. And I don't know, I'm looking forward to see what happens in the next few years and where we go with that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Sometimes science moves so slow, but sometimes it moves so fast. And I think if we even just go back, 5 years ago, this idea of looking at brain, blood barrier, what's going on back and forth, I mean, that wasn't even talked about.
No, yeah, there was almost nobody. We're really coming out now, and it's I'm happy when I talk. One of my mentors that is over 90 years old was really one of the first people that started to look into these things. And when I talk to him and I'm like, oh, we're looking at this, like, oh yes, finally someone is believing it because I tried. I was saying it 25 years ago, but people were not believing me. So yeah.
Yeah, that must make him proud too. That you check in and tell him what you're learning. Yeah,
Yes,
that's amazing. So as we wrap up here, how can people get a hold of you if they want to collaborate, if they want to know about what you're doing, or if they want to come and work for you in your lab? How do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a website, as you said, fossatilab.com. You can find me on the Temple website. My email is sylvia.fossati@temple.edu. So you can reach out by email easily and very open. We have students coming to the lab, undergrad for summer projects, internships and things like that. And we'll see where the lab grows more. We'll see where it goes. But I'm definitely very happy to talk to people and, for what I can give advice.
Yeah, and you're very active on LinkedIn too. I mean,
Absolutely. Yes. I'm on LinkedIn. So yeah, reach out, connect, or follow me on LinkedIn. I don't know if I can post this on LinkedIn, but if I can, I definitely do it, share it.
of course, you can post it on LinkedIn. Yes.
Okay.
Well, Sylvia, is there any kind of last thoughts that you would want to add, or have we kind of talked about all the things that you want to talk about here?
I think we've covered pretty much everything. So thank you so much for inviting me to this, and it was really nice, fun conversation. And good luck with the podcast because it's gonna be really interesting.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you so much for taking this this very complex, science that you're doing and putting it in a way that, the general public can understand. They might not understand the nuances here, but what you're doing is very, very important. So thank you for that dedication and that passion and all the time that you're spending doing this. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining Research Renaissance. For more information and to stay updated, subscribe for more episodes and visit our website at tofflertrust.org. Feel free to call us if you have any thoughts, suggestions, or just want to find out more about the Karen Toffler Charitable Trust. Until we meet again, onward and upward.